What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel.
So Tim Seeley's Nightwing is like the best thing to come out of DC Rebirth, right? And I feel like we say that about everything, don't we? Like I'm doing a video on Action Comics and it's like Action Comics is the best thing to come out of DC Rebirth. And then we do Detective Comics and it's like Detective Comics is the best thing to come out of DC Rebirth. But that's a good thing, right? I mean, it's a good thing when we sit down and we're reading a story and we're like, this story's the best thing to come out of DC Rebirth, because that's how I feel about DC right now. And it's crazy because I feel like I've missed out on this like amazing world of comics. And it's like, I'm so disappointed in myself for not getting into DC sooner. The great thing is, this is my channel. So now I get to go back and cover all these classic DC stories that I want to read and that I want to cover because I think it would be fun. But Tim Seeley, the way he does this, or at least the way he ends this story, is insane. I'm trying to wrap my head around how the ending, like the last page, boom, reveal is just like, I don't know how to go with that, but we will cross that bridge when we get to it. The cool thing about this is keep in mind, with Nightwing, really in DC Rebirth, it's all about him figuring out who he is. That's his whole thing, is trying to figure out who he is, discover what it is that he's about. Because remember, when it came to Nightwing, he served as Grayson for a time, at least as is written, following the chronology anyway. He served as Grayson for a time, different things like that. He was an international spy working for Spiral, doing all these different things, and then he basically came across Raptor, this guy who was like Batman, but more extreme, was willing to kill. And it made Nightwing, it made Dick Grayson question his place in the superhero pantheon. Is Batman right when he says that we shouldn't kill people, or is it Raptor who's right? This basically led him to some sort of an identity crisis. But before we get into Nightwing, what we do is we pick up with Damian Wayne in like one of the most adorable moments ever in the history of his character. And the reason why is because he's practicing his Titans call. He's sitting up on a gargoyle and he's just like, to me, my Titans. And he's just like practicing how to bring his Titans together. And it's hilarious because he's discovered by Barbara Gordon and by Batman. And he's so embarrassed. He's so embarrassed, and it's absolutely adorable. That's why I love Damian Wayne's character, because he's still just a kid. Like, he's just a little kid, basically, He has all kinds of experience, but when it comes down to it, he's just a kid, and kids get embarrassed doing silly things. And so, because of that, of course, the question everybody has is, where's Dick Grayson? Because remember, Dick Grayson more or less just kind of raced off from Barbara Gordon, raced off from Batman, said, I have some things to figure out. That led him into the whole Rise of Raptor storyline. And then, none of the members of the Bat family have seen him since. Well, of course, Damian Wayne basically says, hey, look, he took off and he is in Bludhaven. Now, the reason why this matters is because within DC Comics, following the launch of the New 52, this is the first time that we're actually seeing Dick Grayson take up his role in Bludhaven. This is the first time we're seeing him in that position where he's undergoing, his traditional role as Bludhaven's superhero. And the cool thing about the way that Tim Seeley does this is it would be very, very easy for him to just have, Nightwing face off against, somebody else's villains, because that's what Nightwing always did. Nightwing never really had his own rogues gallery, just because of the fact that Dick Grayson was such an intrinsic part of other people's stories. He was part of Teen Titans. He was part of Batman. He was always fighting somebody else's villains. What Tim Seeley does is he basically gives Nightwing his own rogues gallery. He gives him his own villains. Now, of course, he starts small and works his way up, but he also introduces the notion of consequence, that the actions of Nightwing over the course of his career have fallout. They have backlash. And what this does is this picks up with a guy by the name of Paulie Paterno. Now, Paulie Paterno is basically just running a import-export operation, but of course, as we know, or at least those people who are familiar with DC Comics know, Bludhaven is a pretty corrupt city. And so if a guy is running an import-export business, it's a very good chance that he's importing and exporting illegal goods, black market items, where they happen to be, weapons, drugs, the whole 9 yards, sometimes people. And so because of that, Paulie Paterno, when somebody knocks on his door, he goes to answer and he's just yanked out. Somebody apparently, seems to beat him to death. And so from here, we pick up with a place called the Haven Community Center. And that's kind of the way things go with regards to what Tim Seeley's doing. Basically, Bludhaven's referred to as like the Haven or the Blood or something like that. But the fact remains here that we really have Dick Grayson meeting with a woman named Sean Sang. Now, Sean Sang has a pretty cool history in the realm of DC. Those of you guys who are longtime fans of Nightwing, you're going to see a lot of familiar faces from his publication history that are going to be rolled over into the story. But the first question Sean says is, I'm basically hiring you for a volunteer position. Why do you want to be here? And of course, Dick Grayson goes to this whole thing, right? I mean, it's really Tim Seeley sitting us down. If you're a new reader, he sits you down as a reader reader and says, here's where we stand. And that's the cool thing about this. You know what I mean? When it comes to comics, one of the things that I really don't like, that I really don't care for too much, is when someone's like, hey guys, here's a line-by-line explanation of what's going on before the story starts. That's not bad, but I prefer they would work it into the story because it would make it a little more organic, make it a little more tangible. And that's what happens. You know, Tim Seeley sits down and with Nightwing's own reflection, basically says, well, I want to trust people again. You know, I was Dick Grayson, the sidekick of Batman for years and years. And then, you know, I went off and did my own thing, became a spy. Then I met this guy named Raptor, and Raptor basically threw my identity into question whether or not I was actually fulfilling my goal as a superhero, being a good guy. And so now I'm on this search for identity as Nightwing, and I'm taking up residence in Bludhaven to basically make it my own version of Gotham City. But of course, that's self-reflection. That's him musing to himself. Instead, he just basically tells her, hey, you know, I love your ad campaign. I love the ad campaign that you guys launched. You know, now, of course, Sean basically says, look, we know more about you than we think you do. You know, of course, they don't know he's Nightwing, or at least she doesn't seem to indicate that anyway. Instead, what she says is, look, we know your parents were part of the Flying Graysons. We know that you lost your parents. You're basically the exact kind of person we need to lead these kids. These kids feel cast off. They feel pushed out. They've lost a lot of the things that matter to them. You're coming from that same place, and you worked out well. So if you're a shining example of what these kids can become if they follow the right path, then we want you in this position. Now from here, we're introduced to a guy by the name of Jimmy Nice. And Jimmy Nice, as far as I'm aware, is a new well, not really a new creation. I want to say that he actually appeared back in the old comic adaptations of Batman the Animated Series, I think. I'm not going to swear that off the top of my head, but as far as him being like a person with any real measure of power or control, I think this is the first time that Tim Seeley kind of revamps him, which is kind of interesting here. But the fact remains that the perception Tim Seeley puts off is that Jimmy Nice is a bad guy. Jimmy Nice is basically saying, you know, they need to wear their costumes tonight. Of course, Sean replies by saying, you know, they're not ready for that kind of a thing. One of the characters named Grace, also using the name Orca, couldn't bear to see herself in a mirror, and she basically just kind of ran off. We don't know exactly who it is, you know, that they're referring to when they say they. Instead, we basically pick up with Dick Grayson. This is kind of the cool thing here, is because with Tim Seeley, he shows us like the other side of Dick Grayson, right? Like whenever we read Nightwing comics, it's like, yeah, and then he's off fighting this guy, and then we pick up another comic and he's like, and he's off fighting that guy. Of course, you know, we have Robin Hood #1 Rebirth, which is kind of cool to see, but this is Tim Seeley basically showing us that Nightwing's used to like constant action. You know, when he was part of the Spiral or what have you, he was part of constant action. He was part of constant events that were going on. There was never a dull moment in his life, but now he's just in Bludhaven and it doesn't really seem like there's anything happening. And so he's basically just kind of killing time. He's bored out of his mind, which is interesting enough. But then of course, basically we have, you know, night dawns, and then he's like, okay, you know, let's go out and do our thing. And so what happens is in the midst of his attempts to basically go through Bludhaven to learn more about the city, he's met by a guy named Gorilla Grimm. Now, Gorilla Grimm, again, is a long time, I think he appeared something in like 25, 26 comics in DC's publication history. And that's the trend that we're going to see. These people that we're going to see popping up here are small time characters. They never had great big huge things. Like, we're not going to see the Penguin in this story. We're not going to see the Joker. We're not going to see Two-Face. One, because those are Batman villains. And two, the fact that these characters appeared in so few comics allows Tim Seeley to do whatever he wants with them. He's just like, we can do whatever because they're so obscure. If anybody knows anything about it, they probably don't care that we change it. And the other people don't know who they are at all. And so we can do whatever we want with these characters. But the issue here is that Gorilla Grimm seems to be escaping the cops, basically running from the law. But then he turns around and tells, you know, Nightwing, look, I'm being framed for a murder that I didn't commit. You have to help me out. Now, the other half of this is we pick up with a woman by the name of Cherry. Now, Cherry, as she exists here, is basically the head of what seems to be their tourism bureau. And it seems like Bludhaven's trying to half rechristen itself as a city that has some effectiveness in terms of its police, but is also a city that's trying to drive tourism. Like, you know, please come here, do something. Like, just come to our city so we don't go broke because we have no tourism. You know, we have high crime, we have a lot of bad things. But the idea is, she says, look, we have our own superhero now. We're basically like Gotham City. And that's the cool thing. That's the coolest thing about this, because for people who read Nightwing for a long time, and this might be kind of a controversial statement, but Bludhaven and Nightwing was basically, or I guess Bludhaven, the city itself, was basically like Nightwing's Gotham City. That's what it was. Dick Grayson grew to be such a popular character that DC had to do something with him. They were like, we can't have him on a team forever. We can't have him be Batman's sidekick forever. He's so popular, let's just give him his own thing. And so they gave him his own city called Bludhaven, you know, and depending on what era of DC Comics you were talking about, sometimes it was across the river from Gotham, sometimes it was, you know, further away. But the fact remains here that it was always basically Nightwing's version of Gotham City. And so it was cool to see him as a Batman-esque character. But again, the struggle with Nightwing comics was the fact he didn't really have his own rogues gallery. But the idea here is that when he's talking to Gorilla Grimm says, hey, go talk to Sean Sang. Go see her and she'll verify my story. She'll tell you that I'm a good guy. The issue is that when Nightwing gets to where Sean Sang's at, we find out that she's a villain called the Defacer. Now, on the surface, it's like, who in the heck is the Defacer? Well, Tim Seeley does not let us down. What he does is he jumps to the past. He jumps to the past of this, and he basically shows us the origin story to a degree, or really the first encounter of the Defacer and Dick Grayson. I mean, for the most part, she was just super small time. She was never like a huge, grandiose supervillain. She was literally working alongside some character called the Pigeon, and all they did was just run around and deface some of Gotham's most important historical artifacts, as a statement against the system, kind of this anarchist, social justice warrior sort of movement. But the idea here is that there was a moment that was shared between Robin and Defacer. It was a glance. It was a simple glimpse, and that'll be something that's focused on later. But what happens is, kind of jumping back to the current moment right now, the two of them begin getting into a huge argument, and the reason why is because earlier in the story, when Jimmy Nice was talking about how they need to wear their masks, and Sean Sang was saying, well, they're not ready, it's because it was a support group. This was a support group of all these different villains that had faced off against Nightwing and Batman when they were younger, and had basically ran away from Gotham City, took up residence in Bludhaven, and they were trying to turn their lives around. They're trying to make themselves better. But what's happening is Nightwing shows up here, and there's a chance he'll make them relapse, because while they've made all this improvement, instead they would go back to their evil ways, because they would attack Nightwing, and by attacking Nightwing, they would fall back into the role of villains and start attacking other people again. And so it's not like, at least, the way it's put off, it's not like Jimmy Nice is a terrible guy. Jimmy Nice was like, hey, look, we're running a support group here. Sean Sang's pissed that Nightwing showed up and could potentially ruin all the progress that these guys have made. And so what happens is Nightwing really just kind of bails out, says, hey, look, I had no idea. I didn't know this was going on. It was not my intention to show up here and cause all kinds of problems. I'll go ahead and leave now. And so the cool thing is that Jimmy Nice basically follows him out and says, hey, look, man, these kids come from a bad place. They come from a very, very difficult place. The reason why they became villains are as expansive as the intricate lives of the characters themselves. But the fact remains that they came here to start over, away from you. But he also says they need you. They need someone familiar. These kids can only go so far on their own. It's a constant struggle. What they need is someone to lift them up, to show them the way. And even though they look at you and they see you as a villain, you can be a force for good. You can say, look, I'm sorry we fought in the past. I want to help make you, what you want to be. I want to help you become a good guy. And so when Dick Grayson asks, Jimmy Nice what he knows about Gorilla Grimm, Jimmy Nice basically says, hey, look, the last bit of information I heard was that Gorilla Grimm had basically taken up residence, or was operating out of a place called Meadow Mall. Now, Meadow Mall is not a traditional mall, so to speak. It's basically just a black market emporium. I mean, what Dick Grayson tells us and what we know is that anything is for sale. Drugs, people, weapons, the whole nine yards. You can buy anything there. But the idea is that when he goes around and starts asking questions, he's sent to a woman by the name of Jane. Now, this is kind of funny here. This is actually pretty hilarious. On the surface, we would think that, of course, Jane being a woman of the night, our thought would be, well, Gorilla Grimm and Jane were DC, that's weird. But instead, what we find out is that Gorilla Grimm was trying to be a good guy. He wasn't really dealing in arms trading like he did, back in the older days when he first encountered Dick Grayson and Batman before he traveled to Bludhaven. Instead, once he got to Bludhaven, he was trying to stay a good guy. The issue with this was that his manhood, or gorillahood as it's referred to, was kind of put in jeopardy in the sense that because his only real skill set was trading guns, and because he left that behind, he didn't quite feel competent. And so what he would do is he would go to Meadowdale Mall, he would grab Jane, and then he would pay her for them to act out scenarios where he was like King Kong or something like that, where she was like a damsel in distress, that kind of thing. It's crazy. But it made him feel in control. It made him feel like he had control of his life. It made him feel confident, and it made him feel strong, which is kind of funny. It's kind of I would almost pay to read that comic. Like it'd be kind of funny to be, at the very least. But again, with this information, Dick Grayson basically travels back to the residence of where Gorilla Grimm was located, and he basically starts to realize that Gorilla Grimm was basically framed. That somebody somewhere beat, Paulie Paterno to death, and then made it look like Gorilla Grimm had done it. And so the question is, or at least the story itself, turns into this whodunit mystery. Who is it that's going around and framing these different people? Who is it that's going around and essentially duping these individuals? Now, of course, transitioning back again to Sean Sang, after this meeting, when everybody departs, we end up having Nightwing, of course, showing up and knocking on her door, and the two of them talking. But the cool thing about this is that Tim Seeley really builds lays the groundwork for something special between the two of them. And the reason why is because they have a conversation. Of course, the two of them knowing who the other is, they have a conversation, and they basically sit down and they say, hey, look, you know, what if we had met under different circumstances? You know, what if Dick Grayson was not a sidekick of Batman? What if they were two kids who were, you know, or two individuals, two teenagers walking down the street, accidentally bumped into each other, and then everything just kind of blossomed from there? What direction would their lives have taken? Now, of course, again, this is Tim Seeley setting the stage and saying there will be something special between the two of them. And that works out, right? Because when it comes to the character of Nightwing, what you don't want is a carbon copy of Batman. No Nightwing fan wants that. And if they got that, they would be pissed. They want a character that's unique, that's wholly to his own. That's like, yeah, he learned from Batman, but he evolved and grew and became his own guy. Batman is closed off. He's isolated. He's cold-hearted. He doesn't have any real romantic ties to anybody. I mean, there's Talia al Ghul, I guess, and Catwoman to a degree, but there's no like significant other. There's no woman that he's like genuinely in love with that he could see himself spending the rest of his life with. You know, even when it comes to the Bat family, to Dick Grayson, Damian, Jason Todd, you know, all these guys, there's no like real love there. I mean, it's him, you know, I value you as a person and I love you as much as Batman can express love, but that's about it. With Nightwing, you know, Tim Seeley's saying he's not like that. He's not really emotional, but he's not closed off. He's not cold. You know, he's a warm persona to be around. And that's why fans love him so much, because he's got so much character, he's got so much drive, so much charisma, you know, and plus he has the best ass in comics. Faust, this one goes out to you, man. But what we end up doing here is basically, you know, transition with Sean Sang being arrested for, again, you know, the belief that she's, or at least being a suspect in a murder. And then we also have, you know, this group called the Whales, you know, is really all they are. The Whales Enders is kind of a weird name, but they are, you know, one of the most capable street gangs in Bludhaven, and they're watching the events unfold. And of course they see that Nightwing's here, but we also have Orca. Again, we have Grace, this character with really, you know, super strength. And the idea here is that they want to kind of send a message saying, hey, look, superheroes aren't welcome in Bludhaven. You know, Bludhaven is a place for criminals. You know, superheroes need to stay out. And so what we do is we pick up with this crime scene that Sean's being framed for. Of course, this is also the first introduction in Nightwing Rebirth that we get Detective Svabata, I think is how you pronounce it. Sabata, I'm not sure how you pronounce that name. She's basically Bludhaven's version of Commissioner Gordon to a degree. Not necessarily on the straight and narrow as Commissioner Gordon seems to be. Her moral compass is a little more ambiguous in some ways, but for the most part, it's basically setting the stage and saying this is going to be Nightwing's own Commissioner Gordon to a degree. But what happens is Nightwing looks around here and of course sees a whole bunch of, you know, spray paint, you know, words like murder, different things like that, and it seems too obvious, you know, especially when you consider the fact that when it came to the character of Sean Sang, the defacer, she wasn't a murderer. She was a person that would go and just graffiti stuff, you know, she was a person that would commit these crimes by damaging property, you know, but she wasn't a killer. And so what happens is Nightwing basically sits down with Savada and says, look, you know, you've got to look deeper than this. You got to look at the picture, the bigger picture that's going on here, and you'll find that something just doesn't make sense, that things just don't work. And so what happens is Nightwing goes to Jimmy Nice and says, look, I need friends. That's his whole thing here. He says, look, I'm only one man. I'm new to this city. I can't do this on my own. Batman couldn't even do it on his own. Batman needed a Bat family in order to ensure Gotham's safety in its entirety. And so he goes to Jimmy Nice and says, look, you know, I need friends. I need people in my corner that can pull some strings within the government. I need people within the city. You know, I need people in my corner that can help me get around some red tape so that I can actually do my job effectively. And so it looks like Jimmy Nice is kind of being built up as one of the silent partner type of allies. But of course, Jimmy Nice also gives us his story as well. And what he tells us is that at one point he was in a relationship with a girl named Jamie, I think is how you pronounce it, or Jamie rather. And Jamie, of course, you know, the two of them were essentially in love. The issue was that at the time, Jimmy was on this downward spiral. He was hitting every hellhole on the way down to the bottom. He was in drugs, he was in alcohol, the whole 9 yards. And it ultimately led to him driving off of a road and Jamie dying and, you know, him surviving the experience. And so in a lot of ways, he kind of blamed himself. But what he says is by leading this group called the Runoffs, by leading these kids, by trying to show them a better way, he's basically making up for his past actions. This is really cool because it builds up his character, right? I mean, it gives us a measure of relatability because we've all had instances where we've made mistakes. I mean, sure, we haven't driven off of a road and gotten somebody killed, but we've all made mistakes to a degree. And if those are mistakes that we can't rectify with the person that we made a mistake to, then we can try to rectify it through other means. You know, we donate or something like that, but we try to rectify it as best we can. Sometimes it's just to satisfy our own guilty conscience. Sometimes it's because we legitimately think it's the right decision to make. But what happens is Nightwing basically takes this alliance with Jimmy and he goes to the Runoffs and says, look, I know we all started off on a bad foot. I know a lot of you guys may have served time in prison. Some of you guys were being chased by myself and Batman, and you just came here to Bludhaven, you know, just trying to get away from the two of us. But regardless of the histories that we have, you know, a couple of your number have been arrested under the fact that they've been framed for a crime. Gorilla Grimm's been framed. Sean Sang's been framed. Our goal should be to clear them out. And so what he says is, tell me what you know. Tell me what you know that you can't tell the cops. And this is the reason why this is being done, is because with these runoffs, nobody trusts them. They're basically criminals. Everybody that looks at them says, well, they're bad guys. I don't care that they're trying to rectify their history. They're bad guys. They can't be trusted. And so in response to this, they basically start spilling the beans on everything they know to Nightwing. And what they tell us is that there were three guys who were basically working together. You had Polly Paterno, you had Bob Chapman, and you had Carter Forsyth. Of course, as we know, Polly Paterno ran the import-export business, but then you also had Bob Chapman, who was he was just a lawyer that had ties to the mob. And then you had Carter Forsyth, who ran a real estate business. And the idea here was that they would basically run weapons. It would be kind of this central hub of crime in Bludhaven. You would have Polly Paterno, who would run guns for them. You would have Bob Chapman with a lawyer, who was mobbed up, who was part of the mob as a lawyer, that he would keep everybody out of the legal system. He'd grease the wheels that need to be greased. He would tie things up in court if he needed to. And then you had Carter Forsyth, who would basically launder money through his real estate business. And the idea was that because they didn't really know how to start with all this, they essentially went to Gorilla Grimm and said, hey, look, teach us how to run guns. Well, Gorilla Grimm said, I don't do that anymore. I'm not involved in that kind of a crime. So he bailed out. Shortly after that, they ended up going to Stallion and they said, hey, look, we want you to be the strong guy of our organization. Each of these three guys basically went to each of these individuals and asked them to contribute to their criminal empire in some form or fashion, or their fledgling criminal empire in some form or fashion. But each member of the runoff said, no, we don't do that anymore. We're legitimate superheroes. And so from Nightwing's perspective, the idea seemed to be simple, that if it was, Carter Forsyth, or if it was any one of these guys that felt betrayed, especially with Carter Forsyth, he would go after Polly Patino, he would go after anybody that he could. He'd basically get rid of his other two partners and then eventually just disappear off the face of the planet and never be held accountable for his crimes. And so what they do, all the runoffs alongside Nightwing essentially travel to Carter Forsyth. And the reason why is because the runoffs are trying to be good guys. They're trying to earn the trust of Bludhaven citizens and its police. And so in their mind, they're acting as a force for good, which they inherently are. The issue with this is that, again, this is when the whales make their move, and they basically attack the building that Carter Forsyth is in, which leads to a conflict between Nightwing and Orca. Now, the cool thing about this is Orca is wildly strong. I mean, you're talking about a woman that spliced her genes with the DNA of a killer whale. While she's best in her element when she's in the water, when she's out of the water, she's still pretty damn capable. More than enough to kill Nightwing with, really just crushing his skull. And so the idea is that Nightwing's kind of trying to stave off the attack. Of course, he's fighting, going against the whales and so on, but he's trying to stave off his attack at the same time, trying to make sure that none of the members of the runoffs are killed, also trying to make sure that Carter Forsyth isn't killed. But the issue with this is that all of this is a ruse. All of this is a distraction. Instead, what happens is Carter Forsyth runs away, and then somebody dressed up as Thrill Devil basically kills him. Now, of course, Thrill Devil, we know, being one of the members of the runoffs, but this is another instance where someone is disguising themselves as a member of the runoffs, committing murder with the intention of framing that member of the runoffs. And so because of this, the plot kind of thickens to a degree, in the sense that when Nightwing and the rest of the runoffs arrive to the corpse of Carter Forsyth, he says, go find the mayor. The mayor was our silent business partner, basically meaning the mayor was the one that was backing the actions of Polly Paterno, Carter Forsyth, Bob Chapman. He was the one that was backing all of their actions and allowing them to act as criminals. Now, presumably it would bring money into the city of Bludhaven, and this was largely, most likely because of the fact that there was no tourism, and the mayor was basically just trying to keep the city afloat, and it seemed like crime was the only way to allow that to happen. The issue is that once they all get to the location of where the mayor's at, the building is basically attacked by whoever this individual is that's going around and framing these different members of the runoffs. Well, then we find out, that the person who's framing these members of the runoffs is Jimmy Nice himself, that Jimmy Nice is the one that's going around and framing everybody. Now, we don't know exactly why he's doing this, with the exception of the fact that he mutters things like he needs control, so on and so forth, but then he also basically takes off with Cherry, to do whatever it is that he intends on doing with her. But from here, we pick back up again with Sean Singh, of course, meeting with Detective Zavada. And the funny thing about this is that Zavada basically says, look, no one believes that the cops in Bludhaven are effective. Half of it's because, a lot of the cops in Bludhaven are just corrupt as hell. And the other half is because, there are so many crimes that just never get solved. Whether it's because, people get off, whether it's because, the criminals just go without ever being caught because the detectives are terrible, whatever the case may be, this never really seems to happen. And so what she says is, I need to work with Nightwing without anybody knowing that I'm working with Nightwing. I basically need to operate behind the scenes and work with him, and you're the only way that I know how to make contact with him. And so because of this, while the entire situation, the entire fight with Jimmy Nice is unfolding, once he basically makes his escape and the Nightwing jumps out of a window, to escape his own death at the hands of cops who believe that he was the one attacking the mayor, he's basically rescued by Sean Sang, and then he's ambushed, or, he's confronted by Sabata. I have no idea how to how to pronounce that name. Somebody down in the comments tell me how to pronounce that name, please. But at this point, we pick up with the hunt for Cherry. You know, we pick up with Nightwing, we pick up with Sean Sang trying to locate her. And of course, once they finally find out where it is that she's at, it coincides with this conflict between Jimmy Nice. And this is when we learn what his motives are. What we find out is that the reason why he kidnapped Cherry was because she was the one that was feeding him information about what the mayor was doing. She was the one saying, hey, look, here's the corruption that's going on. Here's how, you know, Polly Paterno, here's how Carter Forsyth, here's how Bob Chapman are all tied in, here's how they're tied in with the mayor, here's how the mayor is involved in organized crime. She was basically giving him the means to carry out what he considered to be a vendetta against people who were committing crime and killing them. But then he kidnapped her because what he says is, well, the only reason why you gave me that stuff is because you knew you were a criminal. You knew you were bad. The way that Jimmy Nice is portrayed here is like kind of a weird, twisted, screwed up perspective in a way that's somewhat familiar with Marvel's like Punisher, you know, for example. But the idea here is that, of course, you know, you have Nightwing who's able to kind of save the day, but this is what Jimmy says. Jimmy says, look, you know, the reason why I do this, the reason why I go through and I kill these guys is because when I accidentally drove off this road, you know, when my actions resulted in the death of Jamie, the cop who arrived on the scene let me go, and all I had to do was do him a favor. The corruption was insane, and so after that, he basically swore a debt. But what Nightwing does is he says, look, the reason why you're going around and you're killing people that you perceive to be monsters isn't because they're monsters, it's because you can't face the fact that you're a monster. You can't face the fact that you're the reason that your friend, that your girlfriend was killed because of your actions. You've never been able to face yourself as the monster. And so the result of this, of course, is a quick little skirmish with the arrival of Detective Sabata. We're gonna call her Sabata from now on. A quick little skirmish with Detective Sabata. Ultimately, Jimmy Nice is basically captured. Of course, again, this is Tim Seeley sort of setting the stage for the return of Jimmy Nice, most likely as being a ongoing villain of Nightwing. But of course, following this, we also have, you know, Dick Grayson, and we have him, you know, basically speaking with Sean Sang when all the members of the runoffs are freed, and you know, they kind of, you know, come back to this meeting room, you know, this haven, so to speak, this community session for the purpose of getting their problems together and basically operating as more of a cohesive team. But then we have Dick Grayson and we have Sean Sang kissing each other, because from this point, they're basically able to share a life to a degree. Now how far this will go on, we don't know. But it is cool to see Nightwing in an actual relationship, to see him distanced from Batman. And so as he's basically celebrating this, you know, as he goes forward, basically saying, you know, this is basically where I'm going to be operating now. This is my city. What Tim Seeley does is drop a bomb, and the bomb that he drops comes in the form of this. Everything that's happened in this story so far, every single thing that has happened has been witnessed, and it's been chronicled, and it's been studied by the New 52 Nightwing. Square that circle, Rob Core. Tell me how the hell that makes sense. Apparently, this Dick Grayson is not the New 52 Nightwing. So where the hell did he come from? Isn't that insane? Isn't that insane? Like, that's, wow. Like, man, okay, now here's some other news too. Comic Storian spoiled the hell out of this for me. I was so pissed off. He sent me a message on Skype and he was like, oh my God, at the end of the new Nightwing story is the New 52 Nightwing. And I was like, dude, I hadn't even finished this yet, and you already spoiled it for me. I was so mad, but I have no idea what this means. I don't know what this means. I guess it means somewhere along the line, this Dick Grayson was grabbed from the pre-New 52 DC universe and thrown into the, I have no idea. My head hurts just trying to figure this out. But what I do want to see is I want to see some theories. I want to see some theories down in the comment section. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.